Hello everyone. If you enjoy my channel, please support me with one like, one subscribe, and one share.
Best friends first. Have you ever looked at one person for years and believed you knew exactly who they were? Only to wake up one ordinary morning and realize your heart had quietly changed without asking your permission? What if the greatest love of your life wasn't someone you searched for, but someone who had been sitting across the dinner table, laughing at your terrible jokes, reminding you to buy milk, and telling you that everything would be okay? My name is Emma, and this happened to me in the United States. If you're learning English, don't worry. This story is slow, simple, and easy to follow. But I promise you one thing, the ending of today's chapter is something I never saw coming. I never believed that best friends should get married. Movies made it sound beautiful, but real life felt different. I thought love had to arrive like fireworks. It had to be exciting. It had to make your heart race every second. Friendship, on the other hand, felt safe, calm, comfortable. I believed those two worlds should never mix. Looking back now, I smile at how confidently wrong I was. I live in a quiet neighborhood in the United States where mornings begin with birds singing outside my kitchen window and neighbors walking their dogs. Before work, every weekday looked almost the same. I made coffee. I watered my small garden. I greeted the elderly couple next door. Life wasn't dramatic. It wasn't perfect. But it felt peaceful. One person was always part of that routine. His name was Daniel. He wasn't my boyfriend. He wasn't my husband. Not yet. He was simply my best friend. We met because of a neighborhood volunteer event several years earlier. We packed food boxes for local families, laughed over our clumsy mistakes, and somehow never stopped talking after that day. We discovered that we both loved quiet bookstores, long walks in public parks, homemade soup during winter, and old movies that nobody else seemed interested in anymore. People constantly misunderstood us. How long have you two been dating? We always laughed. We're just friends. The answer became so automatic that I stopped thinking about it. Daniel became part of my ordinary life in ways I barely noticed. If my car made a strange noise, he appeared with a toolbox. If I caught a cold, he left hot chicken soup outside my front door with a handwritten note that simply said, "Feel better soon." When I celebrated good news, he was the first person to clap the loudest. When I had difficult days, he somehow knew exactly when to knock on my door with 2 cups of coffee. I thought every friendship looked like this. Maybe I simply didn't understand what love really looked like. Around that time, I had started improving my English little by little. Every evening, I practiced reading simple stories aloud for 15 minutes. Sometimes I made funny pronunciation mistakes. Sometimes I repeated the same sentence 5 times before it sounded natural. Daniel never laughed at me. Instead, he smiled and said, "Slow is good. Clear is better than fast." Those words stayed with me. Little by little, I realized they didn't only describe learning English. They described life. We don't become confident overnight. We don't build trust overnight. And maybe, we don't fall in love overnight either. One Saturday afternoon, we visited a local farmer's market. It was warm, sunny, and filled with music. We spent nearly an hour arguing about which apples tasted better before buying neither of them because we got distracted by fresh strawberry pie. An older woman selling flowers watched us for several minutes before smiling warmly. She looked directly at Daniel. Then she looked at me. "You two have been married a long time, haven't you?" Daniel opened his mouth to answer. I did too. But for the first time, neither of us spoke. The silence lasted only a few seconds. It felt like forever. Something strange happened inside me. My heart beat faster than it should have. I suddenly became aware of the way he smiled, the way he held the shopping bag without complaining, the tiny laugh lines beside his eyes that I had somehow never truly seen before. That single question followed me home. Not because it embarrassed me, because I couldn't stop wondering, why had everyone else seen something between us long before I did? That night, I stood alone in my kitchen holding a cup of tea that had already gone cold. My phone vibrated with a message from Daniel. It was only 4 words. Did you get home? I stared at the screen much longer than necessary. For the very first time since we became friends. Those 4 simple words felt completely different. And I had no idea that one unexpected conversation the following morning would change both of our lives forever. Everyday life together. The strangest part about falling in love wasn't the moment my heart changed. It was realizing that everyone around me had noticed before I did. Have you ever replayed hundreds of ordinary memories and suddenly seen them through completely different eyes? That's exactly what happened to me. One simple text message, one uncomfortable silence at a farmer's market, and one ordinary Sunday morning in the United States made me question everything I thought I knew about friendship. If you're practicing English, stay with me. This chapter is slow, clear, and easy to understand, but by the end of it, one unexpected sentence from Daniel would leave me speechless. The next morning, I woke up much earlier than usual. Sunlight slipped through my bedroom window, but my mind refused to slow down. I kept reading Daniel's message from the night before. Did you get home? 4 ordinary words. Nothing romantic. Nothing dramatic. Yet they felt strangely warm. I laughed at myself while making breakfast. Emma, I whispered, you're overthinking this. Maybe I was. Or maybe my heart was finally catching up with what everyone else had seen for years. A few hours later, Daniel knocked on my front door carrying 2 paper cups of coffee from our favorite local cafe. He smiled exactly the way he always did. Calm. Friendly. Familiar. Ready for our Sunday walk? He asked. I nodded, pretending everything felt normal, even though nothing inside me did. We walked through our favorite community park where children chased ducks near the small lake, cyclists smiled as they passed, and families spread picnic blankets under tall green trees. It was one of those peaceful American afternoons that seemed too ordinary to become unforgettable. We talked about everything except what was actually on my mind. He joked about burning pancakes that morning. I laughed harder than the joke deserved. We discussed baseball, grocery prices, neighborhood events, and the beautiful weather. It felt safe, comfortable, exactly like every other Sunday. Yet something had quietly changed. Every time our hands accidentally brushed while reaching for the same park bench, I noticed. Every time he laughed, I caught myself smiling before I even realized it. I began paying attention to details that had somehow escaped me for years. The way he always slowed his walking pace without mentioning it because he knew I liked looking at flowers. The way he thanked every cashier by name if they wore a name tag. The way he never interrupted people when they spoke. According to relationship psychology, researchers often find that long-lasting love is built less on dramatic passion and more on emotional safety, trust, kindness, and consistent daily support. Listening to that idea later made me smile because it described Daniel perfectly. Real love rarely announces itself with fireworks. Sometimes it quietly arrives wearing comfortable shoes and carrying your favorite coffee. While we continued walking, Daniel suddenly looked at me and laughed. Your English pronunciation has improved, he said. I smiled with relief. Every evening I had been reading simple English stories aloud for 20 minutes. Some words still felt difficult, but I noticed steady progress. Daniel always encouraged me without making me feel embarrassed. You don't have to sound perfect, he reminded me. People remember confidence and kindness much longer than perfect grammar. I repeated that sentence silently. It became one of my favorite lessons, not only for learning English, but for living. Confidence grows through small daily practice, just like trust. As the afternoon faded into evening, we stopped by a neighborhood bookstore. We always visited the same place because the owner greeted us like old friends. While I wandered toward the fiction shelves, I noticed Daniel talking quietly with the cashier. The cashier smiled, looked directly at me, then gave him a playful thumbs up. When Daniel noticed me watching, the conversation stopped immediately. "What was that about?" I asked casually. "Oh, nothing important," he answered far too quickly. "Nothing important?" Daniel had never been a bad liar. I tried to ignore the strange feeling growing inside me, but curiosity followed me all the way home. That evening I opened the English novel I had been practicing with, yet I read the same paragraph 5 times without remembering a single sentence. My mind kept returning to the bookstore. Why had the cashier smiled like that? Why had Daniel looked suddenly nervous? Before I could think any further, my phone vibrated again. It was another message from Daniel. This time it wasn't 4 words. It was only one question. "Dinner. Friday?" I stared at the screen, my heart racing. We had eaten together hundreds of times before. So why did this invitation feel completely different? And what I discovered just a few minutes later made me realize that Friday night would never be an ordinary dinner at all. Feelings I couldn't ignore. What would you do if one ordinary text message suddenly made every memory from the last 5 years feel completely different? Would you protect the friendship that already made you happy, or risk everything for a love that might only exist inside your own imagination? That was the question keeping me awake in my quiet little house in the United States. I wanted to believe I was overthinking. I wanted to laugh at myself. But deep inside, another voice kept whispering something I wasn't ready to hear. And before Friday even arrived, one unexpected discovery convinced me that Daniel had been hiding something from me all along. I stared at his message for nearly 10 minutes before replying. "Friday sounds great." I tried to make it look casual, but my fingers hesitated before pressing send. Almost immediately, 3 little dots appeared on the screen. Then another message arrived. "I'm really looking forward to it." That sentence should have felt normal. Instead, it stayed with me for the rest of the evening. Daniel had invited me to dinner many times before. We had celebrated birthdays together, shared pizza after volunteering, and spent countless afternoons trying new cafes around town. Yet this invitation felt strangely different, almost as if there were invisible words hiding between the lines. The next few days became surprisingly difficult. Every ordinary moment reminded me of him. While shopping at the local grocery store, I automatically reached for his favorite coffee beans before realizing he wasn't even with me. At work, I caught myself smiling for no reason when someone mentioned weekend plans. Even while practicing English, my concentration disappeared. I sat by my living room window every evening reading simple stories aloud, carefully pronouncing each sentence the way I always did. Reading slowly had become one of my favorite habits because it helped me improve both my English and my confidence. Sometimes I recorded my voice and listened again, noticing small improvements week after week. Daniel always encouraged me by saying, "Progress is much more powerful than perfection." I repeated those words every time I stumbled over a difficult sentence. Looking back now, I realize love often grows the same way. Quietly. Patiently. Almost invisibly. Psychologists often describe something called the mere exposure effect. The idea that people naturally develop stronger emotional connections with those they spend meaningful time with over long periods. At first, that explanation comforted me. Maybe my feelings were simply normal. Maybe years of trust, laughter, and shared experiences had gently transformed friendship into something deeper without either of us noticing. But another question immediately followed. If I had changed, had Daniel changed too? Friday afternoon finally arrived. I spent far longer choosing clothes than I wanted to admit. It wasn't because I expected a romantic evening. At least that's what I kept telling myself. After changing outfits 3 different times, I laughed at my own reflection. It's just dinner, Emma. But my heartbeat clearly disagreed. Daniel picked me up exactly on time. He looked relaxed, although I noticed he had chosen a nicer shirt than usual. We drove through quiet streets lined with trees glowing under the warm evening sun. Instead of heading toward our usual neighborhood restaurant, he turned onto a different road. Where are we going? I asked. You'll see, he answered with a smile. That answer somehow made me even more nervous. About 20 minutes later, we arrived at a small family-owned restaurant overlooking a peaceful lake. It wasn't expensive. It wasn't famous. But it was beautiful. Soft lights reflected on the water as couples quietly enjoyed dinner outside. The atmosphere felt calm, almost magical without trying too hard. As we walked inside, something unexpected happened. The hostess smiled the moment she saw Daniel. Your table is ready, she said. Then she looked at me with a knowing smile. And congratulations. Congratulations? I froze. Daniel looked equally surprised. I think there's been a misunderstanding, he quickly replied. The hostess blinked, apologized politely, and led us to our table without another word. We both laughed. But it wasn't a comfortable laugh. For the rest of dinner, neither of us mentioned what had happened. We talked about work, weekend plans, and a funny video of a golden retriever stealing sandwiches at a local picnic. Yet beneath every conversation, silence quietly waited. Then, just as dessert arrived, Daniel reached into his jacket pocket. My heart nearly stopped. He slowly placed a small velvet box on the table. I couldn't breathe. He looked directly into my eyes. Then he softly said, "Before you think the wrong thing, let me explain. Love faces reality." Have you ever prepared yourself to hear the 4 words you had secretly dreamed about, only to discover that reality was even more shocking than your imagination? My heart was beating so loudly that I could barely hear the music playing inside the restaurant. A small velvet box sat between Daniel and me, and for one terrifying second, I believed my entire future was about to change. But what he said next was something I never expected. It made me laugh, almost cry, and question whether love had been quietly rewriting our story long before either of us realized it. I stared at the velvet box without blinking. Every romantic movie I had ever watched suddenly rushed through my mind. Was this really happening? Had my best friend planned something unbelievable? My hands felt cold as Daniel slowly opened the box. Inside wasn't a diamond ring. It was a small silver key attached to a wooden keychain shaped like a tiny house. I looked at him, completely confused. Daniel laughed nervously. I knew you were thinking the wrong thing. I couldn't help laughing too. The tension disappeared for a moment, replaced by relief and embarrassment. What is this? I finally asked. He gently picked up the key. My apartment building gave me a spare key after changing the locks this week. You're the person I trust most. I wanted you to have it, just in case anything ever happens. For a few seconds, neither of us spoke. Trust. Not romance. Not yet. Somehow those simple words touched me even more deeply than a dramatic love confession could have. Psychologists often say that one of the strongest foundations of lasting relationships is emotional security. Before people fall deeply in love, they usually learn to feel completely safe with one another. Looking back now, I realize Daniel wasn't trying to impress me that evening. He wasn't performing romance. He was quietly showing me that I already had an important place in his life. I accepted the key with shaking hands. "Thank you," I whispered. The rest of dinner felt lighter. We laughed about the misunderstanding with the hostess and joked that we had accidentally created the most awkward 5 minutes in restaurant history. Yet beneath every smile, my heart kept asking the same question. If he trusted me this much, was I really just his friend? When dinner ended, we walked slowly beside the lake. The evening air was cool, and lights reflected across the calm water. Families were leaving. Couples continued strolling along the path. Somewhere nearby, a street musician quietly played an acoustic guitar. Daniel suddenly stopped walking. "You've been different this week," he said softly. I tried to smile. "So have you." He looked down for a moment before speaking again. "I've wanted to tell you something for a long time." My heartbeat returned instantly. Before he could continue, my phone rang loudly. I almost ignored it, but the caller was my younger sister. "I'll be right back," I apologized. The conversation lasted less than 2 minutes. She simply wanted to ask about a family gathering the following weekend. By the time I returned, Daniel was standing exactly where I had left him, hands in his pockets, staring across the lake. "I'm sorry," I said. He smiled. "It's okay." But something had changed. The moment had disappeared. Whatever he wanted to say stayed locked behind another gentle smile. On the drive home, neither of us mentioned it again. That silence followed me for days. Instead of wondering whether Daniel loved me, I started wondering why he hadn't finished his sentence. To distract myself, I returned to my English practice. Every night, I read short stories aloud for 20 minutes, focusing on clear pronunciation instead of speed. I noticed something interesting. The more relaxed I became, the more naturally the words flowed. Maybe relationships worked the same way. Maybe forcing answers only created more confusion, while patience allowed truth to arrive on its own. 3 days later, everything changed again. I stopped by our favorite bookstore after work to pick up a new English novel for listening and reading practice. The owner greeted me warmly before saying something that made my entire body freeze. "Oh, Daniel was here yesterday." I smiled. "Really?" "Yes," he replied cheerfully. He spent almost an hour looking at engagement books. Engagement? The word echoed inside my head. Before I could ask another question, the bookstore owner casually added one more sentence. "I think he's finally ready." Ready for what? I walked out of the bookstore holding my book, but I couldn't remember choosing it. My heart raced all the way home. Because for the first time, I wasn't afraid that Daniel didn't love me. I was terrified that he might be planning to ask someone else. Building our family. Have you ever realized that the happiest moment of your life wasn't loud at all? No dramatic music. No movie-style fireworks. Just 2 people standing quietly on a front porch in the United States, finally telling each other a truth they had hidden for years. I thought saying "I love you" would solve everything. I couldn't have been more wrong. Love was only the beginning. The real surprise came after the proposal, because marriage didn't simply change our relationship, it completely changed the way we understood family, sacrifice, and what forever truly meant. Daniel looked into my eyes without saying another word. Slowly, he reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. This time, there was no misunderstanding. My heartbeat became so loud that I barely heard the evening traffic passing behind us. He opened the box, revealing a simple diamond ring that sparkled softly under the porch light. It wasn't extravagant. It wasn't designed to impress anyone. Somehow, it was perfectly us. I was going to wait, he admitted with a nervous laugh. I had a whole plan. A beautiful dinner. A weekend by the lake. Maybe even flowers. I smiled through my tears. What happened to the plan? He shrugged. You asked first. We both laughed so hard that the neighbors probably wondered what was happening. Then Daniel became serious again. Emma, he said quietly, you've been my safest place for years. You were my best friend long before I realized you were also the person I wanted to grow old with. Will you marry me? There are moments in life when words seem too small. I had imagined this question 100 different ways, yet when it finally arrived, only one answer existed. Yes. Not a dramatic yes. Not a perfect yes. Just the truest yes my heart had ever spoken. A few months later, surrounded by close friends and family, we were married in a small outdoor ceremony at a local park. Children laughed nearby. Birds sang from the tall trees. My father cried before I did. Daniel forgot one line of his vows and blamed his nervous smile. Everyone laughed, including us. Looking back now, I wouldn't change a single imperfect moment. Marriage, however, introduced a completely different kind of adventure. The first week after moving into our home together felt almost magical. The second week felt surprisingly human. I discovered that Daniel left kitchen cabinet doors open without realizing it. He learned that I always forgot where I placed my reading glasses. He preferred loading the dishwasher one way. I insisted there was a better way. Neither of us was completely right. Relationship researchers often explain that healthy marriages are built not by avoiding conflict, but by repairing misunderstandings quickly with respect, humor, and empathy. We slowly learned that lesson ourselves. Small disagreements stopped becoming competitions. Instead of asking, who wins? We started asking, how do we solve this together? One habit stayed with us through every season. Every evening after dinner, we spent 20 minutes reading aloud together. Sometimes we chose simple English short stories. Sometimes newspaper articles. Occasionally children's books, because they were surprisingly relaxing after long workdays. Reading slowly helped me improve my pronunciation while giving us quiet time without phones or television. Daniel still reminded me not to rush difficult words. Slow and clear, he would smile. I always answered, like our love. He laughed every single time, even though the joke became older every week. About a year after our wedding, another unexpected surprise arrived. I wasn't feeling sick. I wasn't tired because of work. The doctor smiled before I even asked the question. Congratulations. I looked at Daniel. He looked back at me. Neither of us said anything for several seconds. Then we both started laughing and crying at exactly the same time. We were going to become parents. Nothing prepared us for how quickly life would change. We spent evenings assembling tiny furniture, arguing over baby names, reading parenting books, and wondering if we were truly ready. The nursery slowly filled with little blankets, stuffed animals, and dreams much bigger than either of us had imagined. One quiet Sunday afternoon, Daniel placed his hand gently on my growing belly. I hope our baby knows how lucky we are, he whispered. I smiled. I hope our baby knows how lucky they are. Everything felt perfect. At least. Until the phone rang unexpectedly just a few days later. The doctor wanted us to come back immediately. His voice sounded calm. But calm wasn't the same as reassuring. And the moment we walked into the clinic, I realized our happiest chapter was about to face its greatest test. Hard seasons together. What if the happiest chapter of your life suddenly paused with just one unexpected phone call? One moment I was choosing baby blankets and imagining lullabies. The next, I was sitting in a quiet examination room in the United States, holding Daniel's hand so tightly that neither of us noticed our fingers had turned white. People often believe that true love is proven during romantic moments. I learned something completely different. Love reveals its real strength when fear quietly enters the room and neither person chooses to walk away. The drive to the clinic felt much longer than it actually was. Daniel kept one hand on the steering wheel and the other gently holding mine whenever traffic stopped at a red light. Neither of us spoke very much. Sometimes silence carries more emotion than 1,000 words. I watched families walking along the sidewalks, parents pushing strollers, children laughing outside neighborhood cafes. And I wondered whether our future would still look like the one we had imagined only a few days earlier. When we finally met the doctor, she smiled kindly before reviewing the latest test results. My heart was racing so fast that I barely heard the first few sentences. Then she calmly explained that one measurement needed closer observation. It did not mean something was seriously wrong. It simply meant they wanted to monitor the pregnancy more carefully over the next several weeks. Relief washed over me, but it didn't completely erase the fear. Sometimes uncertainty is harder to carry than bad news because your imagination fills every unanswered question with worry. Daniel noticed my shaking hands as we walked back to the parking lot. "We're going to face this together," he said. Not, "You'll be okay." Not, "Everything will be fine." Together. That single word became our promise. Relationship experts often explain that couples who see challenges as shared problems rather than personal battles usually develop stronger emotional resilience over time. I didn't know the research then, but I was living it. Daniel never treated the pregnancy as my responsibility. Every appointment became our appointment. Every question became our question. Every sleepless night became our sleepless night. Life, however, refused to slow down simply because we were worried. Work became busier. Unexpected home repairs emptied part of our savings. Our aging washing machine suddenly stopped working. One afternoon, I accidentally burst into tears because I dropped a carton of eggs on the kitchen floor. It wasn't really about the eggs. Stress has a funny way of borrowing tiny moments to express much bigger emotions. Daniel quietly grabbed paper towels without saying a word. Then he looked at the broken eggs, smiled, and said, "I guess breakfast decided to quit before we did." I laughed so hard that I cried even more. That was one of his greatest gifts. He never ignored difficult moments. He simply refused to let fear become the loudest voice in the room. To calm my anxious mind, I returned to the habit that had helped me through so many seasons. Every evening, after dinner, I read simple English stories aloud. Sometimes Daniel listened from the couch while pretending to read his own book. Occasionally, he corrected my pronunciation, but only if I asked. Reading slowly became more than language practice. It became a reminder to breathe. Research suggests that reading aloud at a comfortable pace can reduce stress, improve concentration, and strengthen memory. For me, it also became a quiet conversation with hope. Every page reminded me that progress comes one sentence at a time, just as healing comes one day at a time. Several weeks later, another appointment finally brought wonderful news. The baby's development looked healthy. The earlier concern had resolved naturally. I hugged Daniel so tightly that people in the waiting room smiled at us. Driving home, we talked about baby names again, laughed about our endless list of parenting books, and imagined first birthdays, school concerts, and family vacations across the United States. For the first time in weeks, the future felt bright again. But life has an interesting habit. Just when you think you've survived the hardest part, it quietly introduces a completely different challenge. That evening, after checking the mailbox, Daniel walked inside holding a plain white envelope. He looked at it. Then he looked at me. His smile slowly disappeared. Without saying a single word, he handed me the letter. The return address belonged to his company. And the first sentence changed everything. Love grows stronger. Have you ever opened one ordinary envelope and felt your entire future become uncertain in less than 10 seconds? I remember standing in our kitchen, one hand resting on my growing baby bump and the other holding a letter that neither Daniel nor I wanted to read twice. We had survived fear, misunderstandings, and months of emotional ups and downs. We believed the hardest part was finally behind us. We were wrong. Sometimes life doesn't test your love by asking whether you feel it. It asks whether you can still choose it when everything familiar suddenly disappears. Daniel quietly placed the letter on the dining table. I looked at him, hoping he would smile and tell me it was all a misunderstanding. Instead, he slowly nodded. "My department is being eliminated," he said. The words landed heavily between us. He hadn't lost his job because he had failed. The company was restructuring, and dozens of employees across the United States were affected. Still, the result was the same. His position was gone. For a few moments, neither of us spoke. The room felt strangely silent, except for the soft humming of our refrigerator. Then Daniel took a deep breath. "I'm sorry." I looked at him in surprise. "Sorry? For what?" "For bringing this into our lives right before the baby arrives." I walked across the room, took both of his hands, and gently shook my head. "This isn't your burden. It's ours." That single sentence changed the atmosphere immediately. Relationship experts often explain that healthy couples avoid blaming each other during stressful seasons. Instead of asking, "Whose fault is this?" they ask, "What's our next step?" Looking back, I believe that simple shift protected our marriage more than anything else. We couldn't control the economy. We couldn't control company decisions. But we could control the way we treated each other. The following weeks became some of the busiest of our lives. Daniel updated his resume every morning. He attended online interviews in the afternoon. I reorganized our household budget, canceled unnecessary subscriptions, and learned that happiness didn't depend on expensive dinners or new furniture. We started cooking nearly every meal at home. Surprisingly, those simple evenings became some of our favorite memories. We laughed while burning homemade pizza, argued playfully over pasta recipes, and celebrated tiny victories, like finding a great discount at the neighborhood grocery store. One habit never disappeared. Every evening after dinner, we continued reading English aloud together. Some nights I read short inspirational stories. Other nights, Daniel practiced interview questions while I listened. He often asked, "How did that sound?" I smiled. Clear, confident, honest. Practicing English became more than language learning. It reminded us that improvement happens through repetition, patience, and courage. Research has shown that reading aloud and speaking regularly can improve confidence, communication, and emotional resilience. I noticed something unexpected. The calmer Daniel sounded during our evening practice, the more relaxed he became during real interviews. Confidence, just like love, grows quietly through consistent effort. One rainy Tuesday afternoon, while I folded tiny baby clothes in the nursery, Daniel rushed through the front door with an expression I couldn't read. He wasn't smiling. He wasn't upset. He simply looked stunned. "What happened?" I asked. He slowly handed me his phone. "I had an interview this morning." "I know. They called back." My heart raced. "And?" He laughed softly. "I thought they were rejecting me." I held my breath. "They offered me the job." I screamed so loudly that our next-door neighbor later admitted she thought we had won the lottery. In many ways, we had. The new position came with better work-life balance, flexible hours, and enough stability for our growing family. Looking back now, losing one job unexpectedly opened the door to a better future neither of us had planned. That evening, we celebrated with takeout from our favorite local restaurant and watched the sunset from our backyard. Daniel placed one hand on my shoulder and the other on my baby bump. "I think everything happens for a reason," he whispered. I smiled. I think love gives us the courage to discover that reason. At that exact moment, the baby suddenly kicked for the very first time. We both laughed. Then my smile slowly faded. A sharp pain spread across my stomach. Daniel looked at me. I looked back at him. Neither of us spoke. Because we both knew. It was far too early.
Looking back with gratitude. Can one frightening moment erase years of happiness? Or can it reveal just how strong your family has quietly become? The sharp pain I felt that evening froze time. Only seconds earlier, Daniel and I had been laughing because we felt our baby's first strong kick. Suddenly, we were rushing through the quiet streets of our American neighborhood toward the hospital. Saying almost nothing because fear had stolen every word. I believed our lives might be changing forever. I had no idea that this difficult night would become the moment I finally understood what real love, real family, and real gratitude truly meant. Daniel reached the hospital faster than I had ever seen him drive, while still carefully following every traffic law. His calm face hid the fear I knew he was carrying. He kept reminding me to breathe slowly. "We're almost there. You've got this. We're together." Those 3 short sentences became the rhythm that carried me through the longest hour of my life. The doctors and nurses welcomed us immediately. After several careful examinations, they explained that the pain had been caused by strong muscle contractions and stress rather than early labor. The baby looked healthy. My pregnancy remained stable. They encouraged me to rest more, reduce unnecessary stress, and continue attending regular checkups. I closed my eyes with overwhelming relief. Daniel quietly sat beside the hospital bed. Neither of us said anything for several minutes. Sometimes silence is the most honest form of gratitude. As we drove home later that night, the city lights reflected softly across the windshield. Everything outside looked exactly the same. Inside the car, everything felt different. I realized how quickly fear changes your perspective. Only a few hours earlier, I had been thinking about decorating the nursery and choosing baby clothes. Now I felt thankful simply because we were driving home together. Positive psychology researchers often explain that gratitude doesn't erase difficulties. Instead, it changes what our minds choose to notice. Couples who regularly express appreciation for one another often report stronger emotional connection and greater relationship satisfaction over time. Looking back, I didn't need scientific research to convince me. I had lived that truth. The following weeks became slower. I worked less. I rested more. Daniel somehow became even more thoughtful than before. Without asking, he handled grocery shopping, laundry, cooking, and nearly every household chore. Every evening he still made 2 cups of tea before we sat together for our favorite 20-minute English reading practice. Some nights I read. Some nights he read. Sometimes we laughed because one of us mispronounced a difficult word. Learning English no longer felt like another task on my schedule. It became part of our family's peaceful routine. I realized something beautiful. Language grows through consistency. So does love. Neither becomes strong overnight. Both are built sentence by sentence. Day by day. Choice by choice. One cool autumn afternoon, while organizing old photographs, I found a picture from the neighborhood volunteer event where Daniel and I had first met years earlier. We stood side by side holding food boxes for local families. Neither of us looked at the camera. We were laughing at each other. I stared at the photo for several minutes. The answer had been hiding in front of me the entire time. Love hadn't suddenly appeared. It had quietly grown inside ordinary moments that I never considered extraordinary. The cups of coffee. The bookstore visits. The evening walks. The encouragement during English practice. The countless little acts of kindness. Those tiny moments became our forever. I smiled at Daniel. Do you remember this day? He looked at the picture and laughed. I remember thinking you smiled differently than everyone else. I raised an eyebrow. You never told me that. I was afraid. Afraid of what? He gently squeezed my hand. That falling in love with my best friend might be the smartest and scariest decision of my life. I leaned my head against his shoulder. It turned out to be both. We laughed together, completely unaware that someone else had been quietly watching us. A few seconds later, my phone vibrated. It was a message from the hospital. At first I thought it was another routine appointment reminder. It wasn't. The subject line contained only 5 words. Please contact your doctor today. My smile disappeared instantly. Because deep inside, I knew tomorrow was going to change our lives once again. Our happy ending. What if the message you feared most turned out to become the beginning of the happiest chapter of your life? I barely slept after reading the words, please contact your doctor today. My imagination created 100 terrible possibilities before sunrise. Fear has a strange habit of speaking louder than facts. As Daniel drove us to the clinic the next morning through the familiar streets of our quiet American town, I kept asking myself one question. Had life prepared one final heartbreak or one unforgettable miracle? The answer waiting behind that examination room door changed not only our future but also everything I believed about love, friendship, family, and never giving up. The doctor welcomed us with a warm smile that immediately eased part of my anxiety. She apologized for the alarming message and explained that one routine laboratory result had needed clarification. After reviewing new tests and performing another ultrasound, she looked at us with reassuring eyes. Everything looks wonderful. I didn't realize I had been holding my breath until that exact moment. The baby's heartbeat filled the quiet room. Strong. Steady. Beautiful. Daniel reached for my hand, and I felt tears quietly rolling down my cheeks. Sometimes happiness doesn't arrive with loud celebrations. Sometimes it arrives as a tiny heartbeat reminding you that hope has been alive all along. Several months later, on a crisp spring morning, our child entered the world surrounded by love, laughter, and more happy tears than I thought possible. The first time Daniel held our baby, he didn't speak for almost a full minute. He simply smiled with the same gentle expression I had fallen in love with years before. Finally, he whispered, "Hello, little one." At that moment, I realized something extraordinary. The greatest love story of my life had never been about finding the perfect person. It had been about recognizing the perfect partner who had quietly walked beside me all along. Life after becoming parents was wonderfully imperfect. Some nights we barely slept. Our living room often looked like a toy store after a tiny tornado. Coffee became almost as important as breakfast. Yet somehow, those exhausting days became our happiest memories. We learned that family isn't built during special occasions. Family is built while changing diapers at 2 o'clock in the morning. While laughing over burnt pancakes. While taking turns rocking a crying baby. While choosing kindness even when everyone feels tired. Researchers studying long-term relationships often conclude that couples who continue expressing appreciation through small daily actions remain emotionally closer over the years. Looking back now, I completely understand why. Grand romantic gestures fade into memory. Everyday kindness becomes the foundation that quietly supports an entire lifetime. Our evening English practice also continued, although it looked a little different now. Sometimes I read simple stories while gently rocking our baby to sleep. Sometimes Daniel joined me, reading one page each before we both started laughing because the baby seemed more interested in chewing the book than listening to it. Learning English slowly became another family tradition. One page every evening. One new word at a time. One meaningful conversation after another. I discovered that language, just like love, grows stronger through patience rather than speed. Years have passed since that unforgettable farmer's market where a stranger accidentally planted the first seed of truth inside my heart by asking if Daniel and I had been married for years. At the time, I laughed because the question seemed impossible. Now I smile because she saw our future before we did. If someone asked me today what the secret to a happy marriage is, my answer would be surprisingly simple. Choose your best friend. Keep talking. Keep listening. Laugh often. Forgive quickly. Practice kindness every single day. And never underestimate the quiet power of ordinary moments. Because the love you've been searching for may already be walking beside you. Maybe, just maybe, love was there all along. Thank you for listening to my story. If this slow English journey helped you relax, improve your listening, or simply reminded you to believe in love again, I hope you'll continue practicing one small step every day. Progress in English and happiness in life are both built the same way, slowly, patiently, and with hope. That's all for today. I'll create many more stories like this in the future. Please subscribe so you won't miss the next one.